Vienna is exceptionally cold in December. A gray sky loomed over the ancient buildings, and rare snowflakes danced lazily in the chilly air. In the spacious living room of the Hoffman mansion, the fireplace crackles warmly, casting flickering shadows on the walls, which are decorated with concert photos and certificates from famous competitions. Friedrich Hoffman stood at the window, looking out at the empty street, a tall, stately man with noble gray hair on his temples and deep wrinkles between his brows. His fingers, which were used to holding the baton, tapped nervously on the windowsill, beating out the rhythm of a non-existent melody. Behind him, a boy sits in a wheelchair. Thin and pale, he stared blankly through the wall. His hands lay motionless in his lap, the fingers that once moved across the keys with incredible speed, now looking strange and lifeless. Friedrich spoke quietly to his son, telling him that Dr. Lorenz was recommending a new physical therapy regimen. Max, with an almost unnoticeable frown, said calmly that it would be another pointless disappointment. My father sighed heavily. 8 months had passed since that terrible day when their car crashed on a mountain road. 8 months ago, his 14-year-old son, a child prodigy, a favorite of the Viennese public, the hope of the Austrian classical stage, was confined to a wheelchair. 8 months ago, the hands that had created such beautiful music were transformed into lifeless appendages. When talking about the best experts, Friedrich tried to instill the confidence he had not felt for a long time, but Max interrupted him with a bitter voice. He reminded his father that they had visited the best doctors in Vienna, Berlin, and Paris, and everyone said the same thing. He would never play or walk again. Max asked his father to humble himself. Just as he humbled himself, Friedrich's eyes trembled a little, but he quickly controlled himself and said that a new doctor would arrive at 3 o'clock and asked his son to at least talk to him. Max turned away and stared at the wall again. Just then, the housekeeper Greta walked into the room. She was a middle-aged woman with neatly combed hair and a serious face. She reported a visitor who allegedly came in response to a job advertisement. Friedrich frowned and insisted that he had not placed any ads, but he paused when a thin figure appeared behind Greta. It was a girl about 12, wearing a ragged oversized coat and tattered shoes. Her brown hair was tied into a ponytail for some reason, and her big brown eyes looked straight and confident. In her hand, she held a tattered bag. She introduced herself as Elisa Morel, speaking with a slight French accent, and suddenly announced that she had come to help Max play the piano and was about to walk again. The room was silent. Greta snorted, making no effort to hide her disdain for beggars. Friedrich blinked in confusion, not sure how to respond to such rude behavior. Only Max, for the first time in a long time, showed interest in what was going on and looked at the strange girl with curiosity. Frederick began to say that he wondered who had sent her and how she knew about their situation, but Eliza calmly replied that she had come on her own. She had met Max at a concert 2 years ago, and now she could help him. Furious, Greta was about to call security, but Max suddenly stopped her, saying he wanted to hear what the girl had to say. Friedrich was surprised by his son's reaction. He looked at him carefully, then at the girl, and nodded slowly, agreeing to listen to the mysterious guest story. Eliza told her story calmly and confidently. 3 years ago, she met with an accident. Doctors said she would never be able to walk, and she spent a year in a wheelchair. But then she met a man who helped her remember how to move, how to feel. She started walking again. When Friedrich inquired about the whereabouts of the miraculous healer, Eliza simply replied that he had died a year earlier, but had managed to teach her everything he knew. Friedrich shook his head in disbelief and spoke of consultations with the best neurologists in Europe, and the severity of his son's nerve damage. But Eliza confidently countered that nerves could recover, albeit slowly. The most important thing is to believe and not give up. To Greta's pointed advice about shamanism and fraud, she firmly replied that she only offered what helped her. The girl stood up and walked a few steps into the room. Max noticed a slight limp in her left leg. 3 years ago, she couldn't walk at all. Doctors thought it was impossible, but now she was standing before them. To everyone's surprise, Max asked his father to give Eliza a chance, arguing that they have nothing to lose. Friedrich looked at his son carefully. Over the past few months, he had seen Max grow cold and the light in his eyes dim. And now, looking at this strange girl, he saw a glimmer of hope in his son's eyes and words for the first time. The man reluctantly agreed on the condition that he be present for every treatment and stop everything at the first sign of deterioration. When asked about her origins and where she lived, Eliza said she lived in St. Mary's Refuge on the outskirts of the city. Her parents died in the same accident in which she was injured. She learned the address of the Hoffmans from an interview about Max's experience in the newspaper and walked to the Hoffmans' home. Eliza wasted no time and started her first class. She walked over to the piano in the corner of the living room, a magnificent instrument that had not been opened since the day of the accident. Carefully lifting the lid, she ran her fingers over the keys, not pressing them, just feeling the smooth surface. With Friedrich's permission, the girl carefully played a simple melody. A few notes seemed to hang in the air. Max shuddered, recognizing the lullaby his mother had played for him so long ago. Max was surprised that Eliza knew the song and asked her how she knew it. The girl honestly replied that she did not know herself, and when she touched the keys, the melody appeared. This happens to her sometimes. Friedrich frowned. Few people knew this piece. It was composed for little Max by his late wife. At Eliza's request, Max drove to the piano and completed the task himself, surprising his father. The girl asked him to put his hand on the keys. On the third try, he succeeded, but his hands were lifeless and he couldn't press a single note. Eliza placed her small palm on his, and in a quiet, melodious voice began to talk about how important it was to remember not with your hands but with your heart. The music was still inside him. It hadn't disappeared. Just like a river was blocked by a dam and they needed to find a small crack in the dam. Frederick watched what was happening with increasing suspicion. But just as he was about to interrupt this silly farce, something surprising happened. Max's right index finger twitched slightly and pressed a key. The first octave had a lone C note. Max's eyes widened as he stared at his hands in disbelief, whispering that he felt his fingers. Alyssa smiled and said, "This is just the beginning." Max's brain got the signal, and now he needs time to realize it. That's enough for today. Frederick stood there, unable to utter a word. Everything he had just seen was contrary to what all the doctors had said. It could be a coincidence, a muscle spasm, but the look on Max's face was hopeful. This is the first time in months. Max asked Eliza when she would come again, and she replied that tomorrow was the best time. Friedrich offered to send a car for her and give her money, but the girl refused to pay, saying that she just needed permission to come. In response to Friedrich's puzzled question why it was so important for her to help his son, Eliza thought for a long time and replied she had also received help when everyone was away from her, and now it was her turn to help others. Over the next few weeks, a dramatic transformation took place at the Hoffman mansion. Eliza came every day, and Max made small but steady progress with each session. First, he learned to move the fingers of his right hand, then those of his left. After 2 weeks, he could already play simple scales. His fingers still moved awkwardly, but the fact that they moved at all felt like a miracle. Frederick was skeptical at first, but he became increasingly amazed at his son's progress. He observed the meetings, sometimes asking questions, but more often reflecting silently. Eliza not only worked with Max as a therapist, she also talked with him, told him stories, and sometimes even told jokes to make the boy smile. It was another small miracle that a smile appeared on a face that had shown nothing but indifference and pain for months. One day, while watching Eliza demonstrate some finger exercises to Max, Friedrich noticed an odd similarity in their movements. The tilt of the head, something in the gesture, the girl tucking her hair behind her ear. It reminded him of a vague, fuzzy memory that he couldn't quite grasp. That evening, as Elisa prepared to leave, Friedrich asked her about her parents. Eliza replied reluctantly that she hardly remembered them. The accident had happened when she was 9 years old. They are traveling to the mountains. Her father was a musician, but she couldn't remember. What kind? My mother likes classical music. Friedrich frowned. In their musical world, many people have died in accidents, especially on mountain roads leading to popular resorts. He wanted to ask something else, but Alyssa had already said goodbye and left. Gradually, these lessons began to bear fruit not only in Max's hands, but also in his feet. One day, during a particularly intense session, as Eliza played the piano and Max listened with his eyes closed, his right leg suddenly twitched violently in time to the music. It was an involuntary reflex, but Eliza saw it and stopped the game. Do you feel it? She asked, pointing at his leg. Max looked down in surprise but didn't answer. He felt absolutely nothing. But Eliza insisted, your body remembers the music. It moves on its own without the brain's command. That means the connection is there. From that day on, they began exercising not only their arms, but their legs as well. Progress was slow, almost imperceptible, but Eliza did not give up. She brought strange objects, smooth stones, rough feathers, silks, and had Max touch them first with his hands and then place them on his feet, talking all the while about how important it was to awaken the body's memory. Frederick often thought of his late wife, Annalise, as he watched these meetings. She also believes in unconventional methods, the power of nature, and the energy of music. He had laughed about this once, long ago, many years ago. Now, watching his son slowly but surely come back to life, he began to think that maybe she was right. 2 months passed. Max had already played simple pieces of music, although his playing was still far from its former glory. His legs began to respond to touch. He couldn't move them, but he could feel them when they were touched, which was impossible before. Dr. Lorenz, who had been observing him for the past few months, was amazed. He could not explain this development medically and insisted on new tests. Friedrich agreed, and the results astonished everyone. Nerve endings that were thought to be completely destroyed somehow began to regenerate. This is a medical anomaly that is almost impossible from the perspective of modern science. How can I explain this? Lorenz asked Friedrich while looking at the photo. He didn't know the answer, but he thought of the sharp-eyed little girl who walked from the orphanage every day, refused money, worked tirelessly and patiently, accompanied her son. One evening, after a particularly successful session, Friedrich decides to take Eliza to the asylum himself despite her protests. He wanted to talk to the director in person and perhaps help the orphanage. financially to thank them for raising such an amazing girl. St. Mary's Orphanage was originally a gloomy building made of gray stone. The high walls, the small windows, the heavy doors, they all created an atmosphere, not of an orphanage, but of a prison. As Frederick passed through these gates, he felt an unpleasant chill. Eliza walked beside her, looking nervous. Mrs. Klein, the principal, met them in her office, a stern woman with thin lips and cold eyes. She listened with obvious disbelief as Friedrich enthusiastically described how Elisa had helped his son. Elisa's always been an unusual child, she said when Friedrich had finished. After the accident, she was better than 4, almost a year. The doctor said she would never walk again. Then, the strange old man, Theodore, appeared. He came every day and stayed with her for hours, talking about something, playing an old violin. We thought he was a weirdo, but we allowed these visits. Who could they bother? Suddenly, Eliza started walking, first with a cane, then a cane, and a year later, she was walking on her own. The doctors were amazed, but could not explain this phenomenon. Friedrich listened and felt a chill down his spine. The story sounded incredible, but he saw the result with his own eyes. Eliza could really walk, although with a slight limp. "Who is this Theodore?" he asked. How did he know about Eliza? Mrs. Crane shrugged. No one knew. He just showed up one day and said he wanted to help. He said he used to be a musician, but his career didn't go well. He died a year ago of a heart attack. Since then, Eliza has changed. She's become more purposeful. She said she inherited his talent and now has to help others. As they left the office, Friedrich noticed an old framed photograph on the wall. He stopped unconsciously and looked at her. In the photo, a group of children stand in front of the orphanage building. In the corner stood an old man with a long gray beard, holding a violin. His face seemed familiar to Friedrich. "Is this Theodore?" he asked, pointing at the man. Mrs. Crane nodded. "Yes, that's him. It was taken about a month before he died." Friedrich stared at the photo for a long time, trying to remember where he had seen this face before. It suddenly dawned on him many years ago when he was studying at the music college. There was such a professor, Theodore Meyer, a talented violinist who had a promising future, suddenly disappeared from the stage due to a strange disease in his hands. They said he couldn't play anymore, that his muscles no longer obeyed his commands. Is it really him? On the way home, Friedrich was silent. Eliza sat nearby, looking out the window. Finally, he asked this Theodore, has he ever talked about his past? Who was he before he started helping you? Eliza turned to him. He said that he had been a famous musician, but had lost everything to an illness. The doctors couldn't help him, and he found a cure himself. But it was too late for his career. Too much time had passed, and the world had forgotten him. Then he decided to help other people, especially children. Friedrich nodded. This coincides with Theodore Meyer's story. But how did he come to the sanctuary? Why Eliza? When they arrived at the mansion, Max walked out the front door. Unexpectedly, Friedrich was stunned. His son was not sitting in a wheelchair, but standing with crutches, his steps hesitant. "Dad!" "Eliza, look!" Max, leaning on a cane, moved his legs. Slowly and with great effort. His face was distorted with tension, but his eyes sparkled with victory. Eliza jumped out and ran to him. "You did it! I knew you could do it!" she shouted, clapping her hand happily. Friedrich could not move. Tears streamed down his cheeks. It was a miracle, a true miracle, and he had seen it with his own eyes. His son, the son sentenced to lifelong immobility by the best physicians in Europe, took a step, a hesitant, trembling, but independent step. When how? That was all he could say. finally approaching his son. "After you left," Max replied, still smiling, "I was sitting at the piano, thinking about what Eliza had said about body memory. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain in my legs. I couldn't believe it. I called Greta, and she helped me to my feet and gave me a cane, and then I was gone, Dad. I was really gone." No one in the Hoffman mansion slept. That night, Friedrich sat by his son's bedside and listened to his excited story about the first time he felt his legs. Max talks about the future, about returning to the stage, about new concerts, all of which seemed impossible until recently. For the first time in months, Frederick gave himself hope. But problems also arise with it. Who is Eliza? Where did she get these abilities? If Theodore Meyer was indeed him, why was she chosen to convey his amazing talent? The next morning, Frederick decided to investigate on his own. He called his old friend, a music historian, to ask him about Theodore Meyer. A friend confirmed that the famous violinist did indeed disappear from the stage more than 3 decades ago due to a mysterious hand disease. He is believed to have died in obscurity many years ago. But there's an even more interesting detail, the friend added. Meyer had a student, a young pianist, Sophia Valentini, very talented, could have done something great, but she gave up music and disappeared around the same time as Meyer. They say there was an affair between them, but these are just rumors. Friedrich thanked his friend and hung up. Sophia Valentina, name sounded vaguely familiar, but he couldn't remember where. He had heard it. Perhaps he should talk to Eliza more openly, asking her directly about her past and her parents. But Eliza didn't come that day, not the next day, nor the day after tomorrow. Max became increasingly agitated, asking where she was and why she had come. Friedrich calls the asylum, but Mrs. Klein reports strange news. Elisa is missing. After visiting the Hoffmans, she did not return to the shelter. Frederick was confused. What's wrong with the girl? Where could she go? Why now? When Max started walking, he contacted the police, but their response to the missing orphans was less than enthusiastic. Mrs. Klein suggested that perhaps Eliza had simply run away, something that had happened to children her age before. But Frederick felt that this was not the case. Eliza didn't look like a kid who would easily run away. She is so responsible and thoughtful. Something had happened, and it was something serious. The days passed one by one. Max continued to practice on his own, using the techniques Eliza had taught him. He was making progress. He could already walk around the room without a cane and play increasingly complex pieces. But there was anxiety in his eyes. He missed Eliza and was worried about her. One evening, Friedrich was sitting in his office looking through old albums. He looked for something about Theodore Meyer, hoping to find at least some clues. Suddenly, he was flipping through the yellowed issue of Vienna Music magazine from 1990 and saw a photo that amazed him. The photo was of a young woman with brown hair and large brown eyes, exactly like Eliza's. The caption read, "Sophia Valentini, rising piano star, student of Theodore Meyer, participating in the Chopin competition." Friedrich stared at the photo for a long time, unable to believe his eyes. The resemblance was uncanny. Same facial features, same look. Sophia must be Eliza's mother. But what is her connection to him, to his family? Then a terrible guess occurred to him. He rushed to his desk drawer where he kept the documents concerning the death of his wife, Anneliese. With shaking hands, he flipped through the police reports until he found what he was looking for, a list of damaged cars. There were 3 of them: the Hoffman's car, a runaway truck, and a small Fiat driven by Sophia Valentini. Also in the vehicle was a child, a 9-year-old girl, whose name was not specified in the report. Friedrich sank into his chair and felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. That's why Elisa knew Annalise's lullaby. That's why she was so eager to help Max in the same accident that killed his wife. Little Elisa was also injured, and her mother, Sophia Valentini, was also killed. But why was Sophia driving along the same road at the same time? Who was in her car? Why didn't Eliza tell him the truth when she knew all this? The next morning, Friedrich decided to go to St. Mary's orphanage again, hoping to find at least some information about Eliza's past. Mrs. Crane, still upset about the girl's disappearance, reluctantly lets him in. In her office, Friedrich asked her directly if she knew Elisa's parents, especially her mother, Sophia Valentini. Mrs. Crane gave him a surprised look, then walked to the closet and pulled out a thin folder. "It's her own business," she said. "We don't normally show these to outsiders, but given the circumstances and your special interests, I'll make an exception." The folder contained only a few documents, medical records, school grades, a few photos. The last thing is the birth certificate. Friedrich took it with shaking hands and read, Elisa Sophia Valentini. Date of birth, March 12, 2001. Mother, Sophia Valentini. Father, this was his name, Friedrich Hoffman. The world around him stopped. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Is Eliza his daughter? But how is this possible? He had never met Sophia Valentini. He didn't even remember her. Mrs. Crane looked at his reaction and said dryly, "I guess this is news to you." Frederick was speechless. He looked at the document and couldn't believe his eyes. Eliza was brought to us after the accident, Mrs. Klein continued, with the box. Sophia left it to her daughter. We had intended to give it to Eliza when she came of age. But considering the circumstances, maybe you should see it. She left the office and returned with a small wooden box inlaid with mother of pearl. 2 letters are engraved on the lid, S and F, Sophia and Friedrich. Friedrich, his heart beating faster, opened the box. Inside were some letters, photos, and a small music box. He took the top letter, which read in elegant handwriting, "Dear Eliza, if you are reading this letter, it means that I am no longer with you. I would love to tell you this story in person, but fate had other plans. You must know the truth about your origins. Your father is Friedrich Hoffman, a famous conductor and pianist. We fell in love with each other many years ago when I was a student of his mentor, Theodore Meyer. It was a deep and strong love, but it had to remain secret. Friedrich was married and I was too young. When I found out I was pregnant, I didn't tell him. I don't want to ruin his family, his career. I left, changed my name, and started a new life. But she always watched his success from a distance. Now that my life is coming to an end, I have decided that you should know your father. We are going to Vienna to meet him. I don't know how he will react, but I believe he will love you as much as I do. Remember, no matter what happens, you are an amazing girl with amazing talents. Use it to make the world a better place, just as Theodore taught you. With endless love, your mother." The letter fell from Friedrich's hands. Memories washed over him like a tide. Sophia Valentini. Now he remembered a young, talented pianist with whom he had a brief but passionate affair at a summer festival in Italy when his marriage to Annalise was in serious crisis. After the festival, Sophia suddenly disappeared without leaving an address or phone number. He looked for her for months, but then he gave up, thinking that, for her, this was all that mattered. It was only a short affair. He returned to Annalise, saved the marriage, and as time went by, he had almost forgotten Sophia, and all those years he had been unaware of her existence. She herself came to save his half-brother, Friedrich looked up at Frau Klein and asked, "Where's Eliza?" She answered, "But she often goes to see an old violinist who lives near the cemetery, whom she calls Maestro." Friedrich went there at once. A small hut on the outskirts of town, right next to the cemetery wall, looks almost abandoned. But when he knocked, the door opened, and on the threshold stood an old man with a long gray beard and deep-set eyes. "Theodore?" Friedrich whispered in disbelief. The old man nodded. "Long time no see." Friedrich, "Come in." The cabin was simple, but clean. There was an old violin in the corner, and on the walls were photographs. The young Theodore Meyer, with the orchestra with students, with Sophia Valentini. "I thought you were dead," said Friedrich, still in shock from the meeting with his former mentor for the world of music. "Yes," Theodore replied, pouring tea into 2 battered cups. "When the disease struck me at my hands, I lost everything, my career, my reputation, my future. The doctors said it was irreversible, but I found another way, a path that modern medicine could not recognize. I learned to listen to my body, understand its language, restore the damaged connection between brain and muscles. But it was too late to return to the stage. Then I decided to help other people, those facing similar problems." "Iris," Friedrich began. "Yes, Alyssa," Theodore nodded. "A remarkable child. When I learned of her existence, Sophia told me shortly before she died. I found her in an asylum. She was in a bad condition after the accident, and the doctors didn't give the girl any chance. I began to treat her with my methods. She reacted differently than others. Friedrich, she had a gift that cannot be explained by science." "Where is she now?" asked Friedrich. "Why did she disappear?" Theodore sighed. "She discovered the truth about you, about her origins. Sophia left her a letter that she was supposed to receive when she was 18. But Eliza found it earlier and read it. She discovered that you are her father, and Max is her brother. She was shocked, confused, and afraid of your reaction. She came to me." "And where is she now?" Friedrich repeated, feeling his heart tighten with excitement. "We're here." A deep voice came from another room. Eliza stood in the doorway, her face pale and her eyes red with tears. Friedrich went toward her, but paused, not knowing what to say or do. "Forgive me," he said finally. "I'm sorry I didn't know you, and I didn't look for you all these years. It's not your fault." Eliza replied calmly, "Mom never told you about me. She wanted to tell you, but then the accident happened. The same accident." Friedrich shook his head. "Annalise died and Max suffered. My mother died." Eliza finished. "It's a strange irony of fate, isn't it? I lost my mother in an accident, but found my father and brothers." Friedrich couldn't stand it. He went forward and hugged Eliza. She was nervous at first, but then she collapsed in his arms, and he felt the tears streaming down her cheeks. "You don't need to be afraid," he whispered. "You are my daughter. I will never leave you again." 6 months passed. The Hoffman mansion is no longer recognizable. Now it sounds like children's laughter, music, voices. Eliza moves in with her father and brother, and her presence seems to breathe new life into the house. Max has made a full recovery. Not only can he walk without assistance, but he's also back on stage. His first concert after his recovery caused a sensation in the Viennese music world. Critics praised the wonderful rebirth of the prodigy and the new depth to his performance. But no one knows the true story of this miracle, the story of a little girl with an amazing gift. Theodore Meyer also moved into the Hoffman house, occupying a small room in the attic. He works with Eliza and Max every day imparting his knowledge to them. Together they founded a small school for physically disabled children where they used Theodore's unique method, combining music, physical exercise, and intensive psychological work. Frederick watched his children thrive and was deeply grateful for the second chance. He thought about Sophia often, about how she had felt raising her daughter alone all those years and about what she had wanted to do before she died, to introduce Eliza to her father. When Eliza turned 13, they had a big party in the garden. The guests, teachers, friends, students from the school gathered under a large old oak tree. The focal point is a large concert grand piano that was brought from the house. As the sun began to set, Max and Eliza sat together at the instrument. Their fingers touched the keys and the first notes flowed from the duet they had created. Together, a melody that intertwined the theme from Annalise's lullaby with the tune Sophia had often sung to little Eliza. Friedrich felt goosebumps all over his body as he listened. This music encompasses it all: the pain of loss, the joy of gain, the hope and faith in the future. Two children who had experienced hardships found each other against all odds and are now creating a new harmony. Theodore stood nearby, leaning on a cane, tears in his eyes. "You've created a miracle," Friedrich whispered to him. "No," the old violinist shook his head. "They worked their own miracles. I just showed the way." When the last notes faded into the air, silence fell all around. Then the applause broke out, huge, genuine, full of admiration and love. Eliza and Max stood up, bowed and hugged. Brothers and sisters are united not only by blood, but also by a common path, from pain to healing, from suffering to joy. Frederick looked at them with a heart full of pride and gratitude. Fate had taken his wife from him, but had given him a daughter whose existence he had never doubted. She nearly took her son away, but resurrected him by the hands of that same daughter. That evening, when the guests had left and Max and Eliza were asleep, Friedrich sat for a long time in his office, looking at the photographs. Annalise, Sophia and his children, their lives have been a strange and confusing story that, despite all the tragedy, has led to this moment of peace and harmony. He quietly approached the piano that once belonged to Annalise and touched the keys carefully. Friedrich has not performed for many years and has devoted himself to conducting, but now his fingers remembered the previous movements and found the right notes. He played a simple melody, the same lullaby Annalise had composed for Max, the same one Eliza had played on the first day they met. In this simple melody that sounded in the stillness of the night, there was an entire story, a story of loss and gain, pain and healing, and a story about the healing hands of a little girl who was not afraid to believe in miracles when everyone else gave up.